Welcome everyone. My name is Zoe Clark. I'm Senior Self-Management Programme Officer here at NASS. And as I said, today I'm going to be talking about coping with the unpredictability of axial SpA. So I'll introduce myself a little bit and introduce the topic as a whole. I'm going to then start with exploring some practical tips on how we can cope with the unpredictability. And as I said, then explore the emotional side and how we can help support ourselves emotionally. I will share the slides and all of the links that I've referred to after the live session. I'll pop the link to those in the video comments, so do come back later on if you'd like to access any of the links or resources that I mention. And as I said, please do get involved in the comments. Even if you're watching on catch up, it would be great to hear your experiences. And if there's anything I've missed, any advice that you can give each other, please do share that as well. So firstly, a little bit about me. So I've had AS myself for 11 years. I realised today it's been 11 years now. I'm also a healthcare professional as well, so I've got a bit of knowledge from that aspect too. But as you can see from these photos, it does mean that I can still get out and about. Sometimes I use a stick, sometimes I don't. It depends on how I'm feeling and what sort of activity I'll be doing. And you can see from the picture on the right, a few years ago on World AS Day, I was able to go watch the rugby at Twickenham. But the thing with axial SpA is that you can have days like this, but you can also have days where, like this image in the middle, you may be stuck on the sofa or in bed for a while, either recovering from these types of events or unfortunately with a flare-up that can be quite unpredictable and quite random. And it can mean that you have to spend time resting, recovering, trying to do gentle exercises, managing your pain and your fatigue. So I can certainly empathise with everyone watching. I know how tricky it can be to manage this condition, and I know the impact of sort of learning to understand the condition and learning to live with something that's so unpredictable. I know the impact that that can have. So I'm hoping today I'll be able to share some practical tips, but as I said, also giving you that advice on kind of how to emotionally support yourself as well. So firstly, why is axial SpA unpredictable? Well, it's a lifelong condition and it's really characterised by having these periods of flares. So that's times when your symptoms will flare up and get worse for a period of time, and then they may well settle back down again. And the difficult thing is that it's different for every person. So once you're diagnosed with the condition, no one can tell you exactly how it's going to impact you or predict how it will affect you in the future. So it's really tricky. Even at that early stage, you've got a very unpredictable path there. And it's an inflammatory condition. So we know that there are certain things that can trigger flare-ups with inflammatory conditions, but they all vary from person to person as well. So it's something that you have to kind of gradually learn over time. And although there's lots of things out there that can really help us manage our symptoms, like medication, exercise and self-care techniques, it really does take time to find the right combination, the right type of medication, the right amount or type of exercise or activity, and all the different self-care techniques that work for you individually. And this can also change over time as well. So it may be something that helps you currently, may not help in the future, and vice versa. So that all takes time, and that's all part of the unpredictability as well. So unpredictability, we know that feeling can be really difficult. In a practical sense, when you can predict something, it really helps us to commit to plans, to manage our expectations, and importantly, to manage the expectation of the people around us as well. So emotionally, when you have that feeling of unpredictability, it is really uncomfortable, and that can lead in itself to stress, anxiety, and depression as well. It's really important to recognise that because of this, we can really easily shift to actually blaming ourselves and beating ourselves up about it. But it's really important to know that you've not caused your condition. And even when you have a flare-up, often there may not be a trigger for this. You can do everything right and still experience a flare-up. So when you have those unpredictable times, just make sure that you're not getting into that sort of pattern of feeling like you're blaming yourself or beating yourself up about it, because it is out of our control. And of course, we know that when we have to cancel plans, it can really make us feel lonely and isolated. So that kind of adds on top of the disappointment of having to cancel plans. And the people around us can find our condition really difficult to understand, particularly the fact that it's unpredictable. I know I've had friends who just haven't been able to understand how I may be able to do one thing on one day, but I can't do it on another day. And particularly for a lot of us, the condition is invisible. Even if you use a mobility aid, quite often you can't tell from looking at someone how they're feeling. So it's understandable that for the people around us who don't experience this condition, it can take time and be difficult for them to really understand that. And I will share some tips on how you can talk to friends, family members, and the people around you about the condition. And then finally, unpredictability can be really difficult because it can even cloud our good days. So even when we're having a good day where we've been able to go through with plans and we're, you know, out and about or doing something that we've really looked forward to, it can still be clouded by that feeling of fear, because it's that fear of, is this good day going to turn into a bad day? Or, you know, when will this good period end? Am I getting a flare up at some point? It is something that we need to kind of be mindful of and really manage and try to appreciate those good days and use the emotional well-being tips that I'll share later to help us enjoy those good days without fearing for the bad days. And particularly for people, if you're newly diagnosed and you're watching this, I just want you to take a moment to understand that it does take time to actually even understand your diagnosis and sort of understand the implications for you. And it takes time to find all of those things that work for you. So the medication, exercise or activity, and the self-care techniques as well. And of course, even to start beginning that process of accepting your condition takes time as well, let alone that long road of acceptance that we all go through. So do give yourself that time, give yourself that breathing space, and really be kind to yourself, particularly if you're newly diagnosed, or if you've had a change in your condition or some other life event going on that's really impacting you. Give yourself that time and space and really be kind to yourself. Now, I'm firstly going to focus on the practical things that we can do to help us really cope and manage with the unpredictability of the condition, because really focusing on the practical things can give us a really good sense of control. So as I've mentioned, looking at the way that we can manage the condition as best we can and focus on prevention, so preventing flare-ups as much as possible. So I've linked to one of our short introductory videos on this topic, and then from there you can explore each of these topics in more depth. Tracking your symptoms can be really useful. So I've linked here to a video about the Chronic Insights app, which was developed by someone with AS. And the app is really great for you to track your symptoms over time. And you can see if they're changing, if they're getting better or worse. If you do make any of those changes, like starting a new medication or a new exercise or self-care technique, you may be able to see over time if it's helping. You can also then track your flare-ups and identify if there are any triggers. But I have put a note here that we've got to avoid that trap of blaming ourselves for flares. Sometimes we can do everything right and still get a flare-up. And as difficult as it is, we've got to make sure that we're not feeling like we're blaming ourselves or like we've caused that. Creating a flare toolkit is a great practical thing that you can do to help with that feeling of unpredictability and bring back more of a feeling of control. A flare toolkit is where any place, so it could be a physical place like a drawer, a cupboard, or a box, or it could even just be on paper, a list of things. But it's where you record or keep everything that helps you during a flare. So that could be specific pain medications or anti-inflammatories that you normally take. It could be self-care techniques like a TENS machine or a heat pad. And also just reminders of particular things that are helpful, like reminders of gentle exercises that you can do if you find that your normal activity is too much during a flare. And keeping a note of your healthcare professional's contact details so that you know where to go to for advice and support if you need. Having this physical flare toolkit means that even on those good days, if you get periods of time where you start fearing that a flare-up is coming on, it's that reassurance that you know that if it does happen, you've got somewhere you can go to where you've got all the things that could potentially help. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes in a flare-up, something that usually helps doesn't help in that situation. So if you've got all of those things in one place, it's going to remind you of all the different techniques you can use so you can go through things and find the right thing for that flare-up. And having a flare buddy can be really helpful as well. So that's someone that you can go to when you're flaring, whether it's to give you a listening ear, to give you some practical help, things like help with running errands or preparing food, or even someone who, for me, the most valuable thing is someone that I can go to and they'll remind me of the practical things that I should do, like taking a certain anti-inflammatory, or even just that reminder of being more kind to myself during the flare as well. And it's really important to look, of course, at our overall health and to try and make sure that we're focusing on looking after ourselves as best we can. So it really is about good self-care, looking at adequate rest and sleep and eating well, and really just listening to your body as well. A wonderful practical thing that you can do as well to give you a little bit more feeling of control and reducing that unpredictability is to create just a small daily routine. So it could be that in the morning you find that your joint pain is quite severe and it leads to you feeling a bit worried about how it's going to be through the day and if you can do particular activities you'd planned. So you might want to create a really small morning routine. For example, waking up 20 minutes earlier and having your painkillers next to the bed so that you can take them before getting out. And then while they're starting to get into your system and start working, just doing gentle stretches in bed. And then having a hot shower or hot bath to help loosen your joints and your muscles. Having a cup of tea or coffee and some breakfast, followed by some stronger exercises. You might want to have that set routine every day. So you've got that standard expectation when you first wake up. It gives you time to help do things that are going to look after your body and helps you then set up ready for the day. Similarly, you may want to do something in the evening instead, so that it helps wind down for the evening, helps prepare you for sleep, reduce any stress that you've had going on through the day. Just carving out those times when you've got that set routine, that predictability, and time where you're really doing that self-care and all the things that can help you physically and mentally as well. And I know that it can, one of the really biggest difficulties when we're looking at unpredictability and how it impacts us is not knowing whether we're going to be able to go through with plans, particularly if we've planned them with people as well. So I would always say that when you are making plans, just warn that person ahead of time that it may well be that nearer the time you need to change, reschedule, or cancel those plans. Of course, that is a big topic in and of itself, talking to others. I've got a few points coming up shortly and a link to a previous session where I go into more detail on that. But it can be helpful just setting that expectation right at the start, just so that they're aware. And also when you're looking at the plans that you're making, just to be mindful, even if you're planning them on a good day and they feel good, making sure that you make changes to them to make them as accessible as possible as well. It's quite easy when you're looking far ahead to start making plans that could be a little bit easier for yourself. So it's helpful just to think and just be mindful of that and make those changes as needed, rather than having to make them much closer to the time. And a bit like when you potentially have different plans for different weathers. So you might say to a friend, let's go out for a walk at the weekend if it's sunny, but if it's cold and rainy, let's meet up at a cafe instead. Having different plans for different flare days or how you're feeling can be really helpful. So for example, when I agree to meet with friends, quite often we'll say, oh, let's meet in town and go for a coffee. But if I wake up that day and I'm not feeling up to it, they could come over to my house, have a coffee there instead. So I'm still seeing them, but I'm doing it within my limitations as well. So having things like a plan B, C, or even D can just give you that reassurance and that comfort ahead of time, so you know that there are different options depending on how you're feeling. Obviously, I will give the caveat that sometimes it's not possible to have those extra plans, but where it is possible, having the flexibility is really helpful. And then final few practical tips. Obviously, there are some days when we do have to cancel plans, we do have to rest and recover more than we want to. And actually planning for those days and having a list of restful activities can be a really positive way of helping to support yourself through that. So I've linked to our sheet here, which helps you plan out your restful activities, and it helps you brainstorm all the different things that you can do. Because then on those days when you have to rest more, having somewhere you can go to where you've got lots of different options gives you something positive to focus on. And I would say, we often say asking for help is really helpful, but recognize that this does take time. Even being able to ask for help takes time. Accepting help from others probably takes even longer. And it is something that personally I've gradually got used to doing over time. And now it's a lot easier for me to do. So if you're newly diagnosed and you're used to being really independent and doing things without needing any help, it can take time to get to that point, but it can be really helpful. And it's similar to if you think of a friend or a family member, if they were going through something similar, you would naturally offer to help. So, and you wouldn't necessarily think anything of it or feel like they're putting you out. So just putting yourself in the other person's shoes can be really helpful as well. And of course, speaking to your healthcare team if you're needing that extra support, and if you're finding that you're doing all the right things, but your condition just still isn't well managed and it's really impacting your activities, then do speak to them and just make sure there isn't anything that they can advise on. an occupational therapist in particular is really helpful for looking at your daily activities and the activities that you want to be doing and finding really practical ways around those. And just remembering that good self-care is really important for anyone, but especially someone with a long-term condition. So taking care of yourself first and foremost means that you're able to show up more for family, for friends. So make sure that you really do prioritize that, which is why those kind of daily habits of positive things you can do can be really helpful. And as I mentioned, explaining your condition to others can be really difficult, but it can be really important and be helpful then when you are having to change or cancel plans. And we had lots of questions about this in the run-up to the session as well. So I think it's good to just recognise that it can be really difficult to explain the condition and the impact it has on your life, particularly if you find that you can do some things on one day, then you may not be able to do them a few days later. That's very difficult for some people to understand. So for lots more detailed advice, I'd definitely recommend heading to this link here for the previous Facebook Live, because I go into lots of detail on how you can have those conversations with people. But I've linked here to some specific information that is really handy to hand to people either to read or to watch. So the first one is our video, which is essentially sort of axial SpA in a nutshell, explaining that it's not just back pain, explaining the whole condition and the impact that it can have. We also have our guide to living well, which you can download from the website, or if you drop us an email, we can post it out to you for free. And that's a great thing to do because it's a really lovely guide. It goes into lots of detail, but in a really understandable way. And you can hand that to someone, give them the booklet to take away, and then they can digest that and come back to you with any questions they may have. For explaining fatigue, I do recommend the spoon theory. So I've linked to that. That's a really great way of explaining fatigue to people who don't understand or haven't experienced it themselves. And then finally, our guide for employers as well. We know that it can be difficult for employers to understand, particularly if the condition has started while you've been in their employment. It can be difficult for them to transition and to know what practical support they can give. So that's a great one to hand over to them as well. Now, linking a little bit between sort of the physical side of coping with unpredictability and the mental and emotional side as well, it's really helpful to look into the stress cycle and really understand that. As I mentioned at the beginning, axial SpA is an inflammatory condition, so that causes pain and fatigue. So this condition and the impact it has on your life can cause stress. And of course, our normal daily lives, we can experience stress for a number of different reasons as well. The issue is that when we experience stress, that increases the stress hormones that our body produce, such as cortisol. That leads to an increase in inflammation in the body, and it lowers our pain threshold as well. So when you're already living with an inflammatory condition, that can then have a physical impact on you. And you can see how this can become a bit of a vicious cycle where the stress you're experiencing increases that inflammation, it lowers your pain threshold, makes you feel worse, you're feeling more stressed about how you're feeling, and it can just cycle like that. So that's just one reason why looking after your emotional health and your mental well-being can be really helpful at reducing the physical impact that stress can have on you. And that's why it's important, even for people without the condition, when they're experiencing stressful life events, trying to manage the stress, the physical impact of that stress is really important. And again, it really does come back to taking your time. So looking after your emotional well-being, it's very different for different people. And I think it's really good at the beginning to really just understand and remind yourself that your feelings are valid. It is absolutely understandable if you feel angry about your condition, if you feel frustrated about the impact it's having on your life, and if you find it really difficult to sort of mentally and emotionally deal with that, that is completely valid and that's okay. We're not saying that you shouldn't feel this way at all. It's just managing how that then has that impact physically on you, but also mentally as well. And these feelings may well change over time. So they can improve over time as you learn to understand and accept your condition, and as you learn to manage it better and find treatments that are helpful for you. But also if you have a change in your condition, that can then cause these feelings to resurface as well. So you could have been living with the condition for a number of years, then experience a flare or an injury or need an operation, you have a setback, and then that can resurface these feelings. So these are things that you can revisit over time, as and when they're needed. But I think it's really tempting at the beginning to feel like over time you're just going to improve your level of coping like this. So as time goes on, you're just going to get better and better and better at coping with your condition. And it's just going to be that continual improvement. But unfortunately, that's not realistic with life. As I said, if you have setbacks or flare-ups, anything like that, you can find that actually you get these peaks and troughs. So you're coping well, and then you have a bit of a setback that knocks you back emotionally, and then you start improving again. So although your overall level of coping may increase over time, it's natural that some days will be better than others. So just remembering that on those days when you're struggling, focusing on taking each day at a time and getting back to those days where you're coping a lot better. So that really does bring us to being kind to yourself. It sounds like a bit of a cliche, but actually there's research into practicing self-compassion, and there's lots of evidence at looking at how our sort of internal voice and how we speak to ourselves can have a really big impact on our mental health. So it may be that, for example, if your friend needed to cancel a plan for you because they were unwell, they had a cold, flu, something like that, how would you talk to them and how would you react to that? Whereas when you have to cancel a plan because of a flare-up, is it that you have that internal voice in your head saying, oh, you've let that person down, oh, you should have pushed through it, you know, all those sort of negative feelings and thoughts that can come up. You'd never speak to your friend like that, I imagine. I certainly wouldn't. So I find personally, and there is research out there, that actually when those thoughts and feelings do come up, they're completely natural, but just remind yourself, be kind to yourself, that you wouldn't be talking to your friend like this. So don't have that on repeat, talking to yourself like that. Again, it's something that takes time to practice. And you can find that you're doing well for a period of time and then it returns. And again, that's completely normal. But some of these tips that I'll be sharing can be really helpful with shifting that thought pattern. So one-to-one support through counselling can be really beneficial, particularly quite early on in a diagnosis, because it can help you start to understand your condition, how it's impacting you, and how you can live with it as well. And connecting with others is really beneficial. Even if people can't give practical support, just having someone who really understands what you're going through, who can empathise, they've been through similar, be able to talk about that and share experiences can really take a load off and take the weight off you. But conversely, sometimes you do need time away from others, and that's also completely valid. Obviously, we don't want to completely isolate ourselves, but occasionally having that quiet time on our own can be really beneficial and really helpful. And as I mentioned earlier, it really is about taking it one day at a time. And perhaps during a flare-up, you might find that taking it an hour at a time or even a minute at a time is what's needed. And you should find that over time that will get easier to do as well. And then looking at kind of stress relieving activities, there are lots of different things that can be helpful. And as always, different things will work for different people. So it may be that you enjoy mindfulness or meditation. And we've got taster sessions for these over on our YouTube channel in our emotional wellbeing playlist. It might be that you can find hobbies and activities that you enjoy that help distract you as well, like films, music, and reading. And doing things like journaling or perhaps keeping a gratitude journal can really help shift your mindset and help to sort of increase that positivity and find positive moments in each day. Lots of people find a spiritual practice is really helpful, and distraction techniques as well. So particularly on those flare days or any bad days, having any kind of activities that distract you from what's going on can be really helpful. And then finally, hobbies. They can be really vital for helping you with your emotional well-being and mental health. And one example I found during the COVID lockdowns, I started taking up embroidery, which I hadn't done before. And I found it so helpful because it's a restful activity. I enjoy it. And it's almost like a sort of mindfulness practice because you're really concentrating on what you're doing. You can have a film or TV or music on in the background, but it helps you focus on something. You're doing something positive, and it's just really nice to see things progress. And as you can see on the left there, if I'm having a flare day, I can curl up on the sofa with my cat, with some embroidery, and it feels like I'm doing something productive, but I'm also taking that time to rest and recover. So finding something that you enjoy, that you can use as a restful activity that also helps your emotional well-being can be really beneficial. And I think it's helpful just to sort of end on almost a positive note, that It can be really difficult coping with an unpredictable condition, but I do think that there are some positives that come from it. And I think we do over time develop a stronger ability to deal with the unknown. And there are lots of times in life when that can come in handy. It does also mean that I think over time we become more understanding of others. So we can definitely empathize better and put ourselves in other people's shoes. And we certainly learn the need for, the benefit of, and the importance of self-care. Self-care obviously is important for everyone, but I think we learn that pretty quickly living with Axial SpA. And over time can well build your resilience up. As I mentioned, sometimes you can get setbacks and that can sort of bring you back a little bit, but I do think it builds up resilience. And I like to think that people with Axial SpA and any long-term condition really become really good problem solvers. We may well look at something and think, oh, I can't do that how I used to, but how can I change it? How can I make it easier so I can still do it and enjoy it? So I think we do get good at thinking outside the box a little bit. So my main takeaways from today, I understand it's been a whistle-stop tour. And as I said at the beginning, it really is the start of the conversation. So hopefully you'll be able to share your experiences in the comments as well, so we can continue this conversation. But really, it's important to understand that it's completely natural to struggle with the unpredictability of Axial SpA. And it takes time to understand your condition and how it impacts you, and that may well change over time. And I've shared lots of tips in this session. But if you're going to make any changes, pick something small, start with one thing at a time and build that in gradually. And then if you find that it's helpful, you can keep it in your routine, and you can perhaps come back to this video, watch it again and take another piece of advice and start putting that into action as well. So don't feel overwhelmed. Don't try and do lots of things at once, because that is going to be overwhelming and it's not realistic. So pick one small thing to change and then see how it helps. And do let us know in the comments if you've made any changes and how you found them. And then finally, joining our welcoming community. So I mentioned earlier, so having meetups, talking to other people with Axial SpA. I'll share a link in the comments to our next Your Space meetups, because we get a group of people with Axial SpA together. We can all talk about how it's impacting us, share experiences, share advice, and ultimately get support from each other. And that's so helpful, and really does leave you feeling a lot more uplifted and stronger as well. And as I said, I've had the condition over 11 years. I've worked for NASS for 3 years. And after every single meeting, I'm guaranteed to have learned at least one new thing. So they really are wonderful, wonderful sessions to be a part of. If that's not for you, then we do have our members forum on the website. So you can always go along there, and there's a whole wealth of information there and lots of support too. And looking at social media and those kind of groups, there's lots of options there. And also our local NASS branches as well can create a really lovely community. So do get involved if you feel like that peer support would be helpful for you. And I've put some links to some specific support. So this is looking at any counselling in your area. And then I've also linked to national organisations that have different focuses on different mental health conditions and things like that. So do get in contact with them if you're looking for support. And then finally, the contact details for NASS as well. We have our helpline there, and you can also email us. So do let us know if you've got any questions, if you'd just like to have a chat to someone or are looking for any specific advice. So thank you for everyone for joining today. And I've got time for questions, so I'll stop sharing my slides there so you can all see me again. Excuse me, croaky throat today. Let's have a look. Hi, everyone. We've got quite a few people joining us today. That's great. Yes, Cameron's asked if the live will be saved so you can rewatch it later. Absolutely. So we'll stay on our Facebook page, and we'll also upload it to our YouTube channel as well, so you can share the link or you can watch it back later. So on the tip of how you can talk to loved ones about your condition, it could be helpful to share this live with them as well, so that they can see from our side the explanation of why the condition can be unpredictable, and then practical ways they could perhaps support you with it as well. And we do have our videos that I linked on that slide as well. Let's see, and Selena's asked, can you ask for a new treatment if you feel one isn't working? I've only been diagnosed about 6 months, so I'm new to this. Absolutely. I think if you're newly diagnosed, it's important to speak to your healthcare professionals and just obviously get their advice, because they'll know for certain medications, sometimes it can take quite a long time to build up in your system and start having a benefit. So they'll know exactly how long you can leave it before deciding whether it's working or not. But if you're struggling, or if you're feeling like it's not working, or for anyone who's been on the treatment for a longer period of time and feel like it's not working as well as it used to, then do speak to your healthcare professionals about possibly switching, or it may be that they can add in different medications, or even refer for things like physiotherapy or hydrotherapy and different things that can be helpful on top of that. So yeah, definitely have that conversation with them. Yeah, and absolutely. If you say you've only been diagnosed 6 months, so it is all new. So give yourself time to start understanding that as well. And an area of our website called Your Space, I'll pop a link in the comments afterwards. That would be a really good place to start and look at the kind of non-medication ways that you can support yourself as well, because sometimes adding things on top of the medication can be really helpful. So do pop any other questions in the comments there. I'm happy to answer any. And for anyone watching on catch up, I will come back and keep an eye on the comments over the next few days. So if you've got any questions, please do pop them in there. I'll give everyone a few seconds to add them. Oh, hi, Ian. Thanks for joining. Nice to see you. So I'm just going to read your comment out. So Ian says, thanks for some useful reminders, Zoe. As a movement teacher, I'm aware that when things are difficult and painful, people tend to stop moving, but that's when it's most important to do what you can to keep yourself moving as much as you can. Group sessions can definitely be more motivating than doing it all yourself. Absolutely, that's a really great tip. And as you say, I think having that group dynamic is a really good motivator. Or if you find that, having something booked in ahead that you've committed to, that can be a really good way of keeping with it. Ian's done some fantastic taster sessions for us on our YouTube channel. We've got an exercise playlist where you can find his somatic movement sessions, and they're really lovely. And with all activity, if you're flaring, you can always modify it, you can always reduce it and change it depending on how you're feeling. But as Ian said, keeping moving as much as you can is really helpful on those flare days. Wonderful. I'll keep an eye out for any other questions. Okay, I can't see any more coming in at the moment, but as I said, I'll keep an eye on those. I'll let you know about our next Facebook Live as well. So we've got a session booked in for Wednesday, the 5th of July at 1 p.m. And physiotherapist Emily Clark will be leading a sort of 15-20 minute stretch session. So after talking about exercise, that's perfect lead into that. So yeah, please do come along. We thought for the summer it would be nice to focus a little bit more on some exercise sessions that people can join in. And as always, they'll stay on the Facebook page and be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so you can always catch up on them afterwards. Wonderful. So yeah, please do add any other questions. And if you're watching on catch up, then do share your experiences in there and any tips that I've not covered. And if you have any thoughts on future Facebook Live sessions you're interested in us covering, please do let us know as well. You can find all of them on our My AS My Life Facebook, My AS My Life webpage, which again I can link in the comments. We've got lots of different recordings on there. Wonderful. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. I hope it's been helpful and look forward to seeing your comments over the next few days. And hopefully see you at our stretch session with Emily on the 5th of July as well. So take care, everyone, and see you then.